Hey there, old souls. It's Dr. J, and our theme for this week, and possibly some other weeks, is ceremony. The importance of ceremony as a central practice for spiritual growth and the transformation of self and society, for that matter. Now, first of all, when we use the word ceremony, I think that it's become so associated with non-Western cultures or very, very narrow and specific aspects of Western culture that a lot of people immediately question whether ceremony is something for them or not, right? There's this idea, I think, in the modern world that that spiritual practice should reflect our preferences as opposed to necessarily reflect what's good for us or what works. It's very common in my experience to share with people a practice that I think will get them where they want to go, and then the response or the feedback will be that it's not their style or it's not their type. Now, in Return to the Sacred, the book that I wrote, which is about understanding your spiritual personality and the importance of integrating spiritual preference and spiritual uniqueness, spiritual personality in your choice of practices, it is also true that while a significant part of the book is about knowing your nature and your style, there's also a very significant message that whatever is not your style is also really important. And furthermore, that there are some practices that whether you like them or not, you should probably be doing. There's a wonderful teaching by a Buddhist teacher who has since passed, and I probably can't even say his name correctly, but Trungpa Rinpoche. And he says that, part of the problem with the way Western people approach spirituality today is they approach it the way they approach everything they consume and all of their commodities, rather than approaching it with reverence and even the kind of respect and caution they might have for medicine, let's say. And so the analogy is fantastic because he goes on, and I'm elaborating, but the idea is really like, we try on a practice the way we try on a shirt or a sweater, and we decide if we like the way it fits. We decide if we like the way it feels, if we like the texture and the color, if it flatters us. And even more significantly, we often question whether it's easy enough. But his point is that, you wouldn't go to the doctor and say, hi, I have a sore ankle. I think I broke it, but I really like cough syrup. So I'm just going to take cough syrup. You're going to take the medicine that the doctor recommends for whatever the problem is. Well, that seems like a long intro for ceremony, but I think it's an important one, because in the Old Soul Republic, we have a vision that there are really 7 essential practices to personal transformation and spiritual growth. And that again is personally, in relationships, collectively, and so on. Ceremony is definitely one of these. And ceremony is one of these phenomenal practices that integrates so many other practices and has so many dimensions of application. And it's almost like exercise is to the body, ceremony is to the spiritual self. So let's transition from there and talk a little bit about why ceremony is important. And I kind of like to run through this mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually. And then maybe we'll spend a little bit of time today talking about some of the elements that you can begin to consider and include, although we'll go deeper into that in another video. So ceremony, if you're looking to understand why it's important for you, or even how to explain to others why it might be important for them, let's begin with the physical. What we actually know now through years of research and study in the fields of psychology, educational psychology, business development, child development, is that human beings are fundamentally creatures of meaning. And to say that we are creatures of meaning is to say that we learn best in contexts of meaning, we thrive in environments and relationships of meaning. In fact, even the older studies that came out of National Geographic and the Blue Zones, as we studied centenarians and we studied longevity, persistently we find that meaning-focused activities are a part of the most resilient and long-living people. Now, of course, that shows up in specifics like relationships, community, religion, and spiritual practice. But at the heart of all those things is a sense of meaning. And that means a framework to hang your life on. So we have looked at this now neurologically. There's a fantastic book by J.W. Wilson. I mean, this is a pretty huge study of learning. It's called The Learning Code. And this, like, several hundred-page research-driven book basically comes to one conclusion, which is if we want people to thrive in work or in schools, meaning has to be a part of it. Even in the business world, we see authors like Simon Sinek, a brilliant speaker and teacher, someone I highly recommend. A huge amount of his work, in fact, I'd say most of his acclaim, has come out of his work around something called finding your why, which is essentially connecting your work to a sense of meaning. So meaning is really the human fuel, right? Or maybe you could even say the human engine. But the tricky thing is that meaning doesn't come as naturally as you'd think. Meaning is something that we often have to choose. Meaning is something we can cultivate. Meaning is something that we can move towards or away from. And the tricky thing is that even though we are built for meaning, the human tendency without education about meaning or support to pursue meaning, the human tendency is to do what is easy, to do what is comfortable, to do what is familiar. And so what ends up happening is we spend a lot of time doing things that ultimately end up replace meaningful things. So rather than having a meaningful dialogue with someone we love that's in our life, we end up sitting on the sofa with them watching TV night after night after night. Instead of, forget the cliche of reading a book before bed. Instead of even just committing to one article on your phone or one video that might be enriching, we flip and flip and flip. And we tell ourselves we're searching for something good, which is the pursuit of meaning. But what really takes over is that kind of hunt and peck, activity of the brain where we feel satisfied by little hits of success and little hits of surprise, and so we get the dopamine rush. And the problem, I would say, in our modern world is that dopamine access has really replaced our relationship to ceremony. In other words, we have replaced or mistaken our search for meaning with a search for dopamine and serotonin and these other mood-enhancing chemicals. So, what does this tell us? If meaning drives education, if meaning drives business success, if meaning drives the brain, then ceremony is the conscious tool to pursue meaning. Ceremony is itself a kind of meaning mechanism, because what ceremony does is it uses the physical reality, time, space, color, sound, movement, to create symbols, representations, to move energy, to immerse us interactively in a field of meaning. And even when we don't fully understand the meaning we're pursuing or the meaning that's available to us, we do find that the conscious creation of ceremony accesses structures, patterns, archetypes of meaning. So if, for example, we use the 4 elements, earth, air, fire, water, if, for example, we use the significance, the symbolism, the energy of the beginning of a day or the end of a day, if we engage in these kinds of practices and archetypes, we find that even though we may not go in with a conscious sense of meaning, we are participating in a meaningful framework. So if you're going to create meaning in your life, then ceremony is going to be one of the most effective mechanisms to do that. And as hopefully I've just explained, it doesn't need to be as complex as a Catholic wedding or as involved as an indigenous sweat lodge or ceremonial steam bath. It can be as simple as waking up. This is actually what my morning ritual is. My morning ceremony is I work with the 4 elements, for example. So I wake up, and the first thing I do is I think about breathing. I think about the gift of life. I give thanks for breath, and I connect with the breath in my body. I connect with the element of air. The next thing I do is I go and I have a big drink of water. Now, we know that this is biologically a good idea, but when I take that drink of water, I pray with it. And I think about this water as the water of life, and I reflect on all the water of the world, the water in my body, the great oceans, my responsibility to care for the water in my life, in my day. And then I drink that whole glass, at least 8 ounces of water in one shot. Now from there, in another moment of my life, maybe I would go on and light a candle. And for a certain portion of my morning, while I'm getting ready to go, the candle can burn safely. Maybe I have to put it out when I go to work. But I light the candle and I take some time to connect with the element of fire. Now, in my life right now, I get to light the wood stove because we've chosen to heat our home without electricity. We heat with a wood stove. And so I pray with the fire. And I take time to think about the fire, and I take time to think about my gratitude for all the forms of fire and light in my life, from the sun to electricity to the phone that I use. So there's a communion through each of these elements with the world around me. And then finally, I come out into nature and I spend some time with my feet on the earth. And if it's too busy and I just can't get out, I can't go take some time in nature, then I go for just a couple of minutes. And if all I can do is stand, barefoot in the backyard, you can see here, I'm now in my backyard, barefoot in the backyard, or take a moment on your patio of your apartment, or whatever you've got, I take that moment to remember my dependence on the earth and to feel my gratitude for the earth. And if I'm smart enough, I even will give whatever worries of the day, whatever fears of the day, whatever hopes of the day to the earth, and trust in that incredible power to transform whatever it is that I personally can barely master or manage as a human being. So this is an illustration. I'm not really telling you should do the same thing. I think we all have different tools available to us. But it's an example of how a framework of meaning becomes a container for whatever it is I'm going through. And that also means that if there's a day where I just don't feel like doing any of it, and I don't even know what I want that day, or I'm just stressed or frustrated or I don't know, whatever might be going on, The container holds the meaning for me. And that's a very, very significant part of ceremony. The container holds the meaning for you. So I'm going to wrap this up. There's a lot more to say about ceremony, but again, we need it on a mental, emotional, physical level. We know that it helps us to thrive in all of our areas of life. It holds for us what we sometimes can't hold for ourselves. But to conclude, of course, most importantly, it is a process of intimacy and discovery in the spiritual realm. So whenever we're in ceremony, we must consider ourselves departing the ordinary world, the daily life, whatever you call regular consciousness, and we are making a commitment, whether it's for 1 minute or 1 hour or 1 week, whatever your ceremony is, we are making a commitment to be open to and touching into a spiritual consciousness, a spiritual mode. And so we pray as if we were in the spirit world and being listened to. We pray as if God were with us and hearing our prayers. For in that enactment and in that belief, that which we conjure, that which we affirm, that which we interact as if, becomes real. And we begin to feel it. And we discover that spirit is present. We discover that spirit is listening. We discover that our ancestors do want to help and heal. But the problem is, if you don't set up the ceremonial space and the ceremonial relationship and the ceremonial commitment, then you're kind of just going by luck, by grace, and these things may remain waiting for you and yet remain dormant or inactive or never really accessed. So I encourage you to think a lot about how you can integrate some rituals in your daily life, some rituals in your weekly life, maybe do some exploring of books about ceremony, or explore documentaries or articles about types of ceremonies that call to you or have intrigued you or feel like the kind of ceremony that you need. And then ask yourself, what is the need in me? What is it in that format or archetype that speaks to me? And is there a way for me to create some sort of approximation of this that is not necessarily appropriation of a culture or tradition or exploitation of a culture or tradition, but simply reflects who I am and what I need? And then finally, commit to it for a period of time. So whatever your ceremony is, I recommend that you test it for 40 days. And that could be, once a week for 40 days. That could be once a day for 40 days. But you're never going to really receive the full benefit of ceremony until you give it your full attention, until you return to it again and again. In that way, you will discover more of yourself, more of the layers of the ceremony, and you'll spend less time figuring it out, less time in relationship to the mechanics. Eventually, as I shared before, the ceremony becomes the container, and it holds the meaning for you, it holds the framework for you, and then you enter into that space to meditate, pray, rest, listen, receive, ask questions, and find out what happens. So, thank you. This was a good long one, or terrible long one, depending on your perspective. But I look forward to seeing you soon. Bye-bye.